Hi, I'm Carrie, and today I'm going to show you how to replace a fuel pump in a TJ Wrangler. First, we're going to go over how to replace a fuel sending unit, and then we're going to go over a couple of symptoms and diagnostic procedures. Alright, let's get started. First thing we're going to do is pull the fuse. So inside your fuse box is a map that'll tell you where your fuse is for your fuel pump. Looks like it's right here. So we're going to go ahead and pull that fuse to depressurize the fuel pump. Next thing we're going to do is hop in the vehicle and start it with that fuse pulled so we can depressurize the pump. Okay, now that we have crank with no start, we know that the fuel has left the fuel lines. Our next step is going to be to loosen up the filler neck, and you're either going to need a Phillips head screwdriver or a T25 Torx bit. Next step is we need to drop the fuel tank. There are 7 nuts that you need to remove in order to drop the fuel tank. 4 in the rear, and 3 in the front. Oh. We're going to let those soak for a minute. So while those nuts are soaking, we're going to go ahead and remove our fuel lines and our electrical. You have a fuel line here, one right here, and here's your electrical, which is sometimes connected right here in the earlier models, but it looks like this is closer to the top of the fuel tank. Pliers, because I have weak hands, and you're going to separate the lines. Squeeze the tab and separate them. And then here's the other one. We'll see if I can squeeze it and separate. There we go. So here we are, an hour and a half later, and we finally got the tank out. Wound up being a pain in the butt. The back 4 bolts were rusted and had to be cut out, but first we had to remove this hitch, which wound up also being rusted and had to be cut out. Yeah, and the front 3 bolts came out fine. So now that we got the tank lowered, we did have some filler hoses that we had to remove. There's this one that just ran across the top. It was in 2 clips. There was another one over here on the passenger side that was a little bit difficult to get off. And then there were 2 vent tubes connected to the filler neck with a zip tie. Had to cut those off and to get that out. And then we also had the electrical in the middle that was connected up to the sending unit. Okay, so our next step is going to be getting the sending unit out of the tank. And so first, what I'm going to do is to take the air hose and clean this ring off. If you don't happen to have an air hose in your shop, you could go ahead and vacuum off the top of the ring with a shop vac, and that'll get rid of the debris. What we're going to do now is go ahead and soak the ring. This ring has to shift around these locking lips, and we'll do that with a hammer and screwdriver, but first we want to make sure it's nice and lubricated. After about 50 hits, I finally got it loose. Might take you a few less. So now that we got the lock ring loose, we want to go ahead and pull the pump, but we need to make sure we pay attention to the orientation of the pump, and we want to try not to spill anything when we pull it out or get any debris in the tank. And now we're going to go ahead and put our new pump in. Okay, now that we've replaced the O-ring, and we've put the lock ring back on, we can go ahead and seat the pump down into the tank and then get the lock ring lined up and then start to lock it. We'll need to take a hammer to tighten it back up all the way. Okay, now that we've got the fuel pump replaced, we're ready to go ahead and stick our tank back in. But before we get it up in there, we had to first replace the bolts that we cut in the back of the frame here. And my husband went ahead and welded them to the frame so they're stationary and they're easier to deal with if we ever have to drop the tank again. And since we're up there and the frame needed some paint, we went ahead and threw some paint on there real quick. So now we're going to connect our vent hoses, get the tank back up, and reconnect our fuel lines and get the filler nozzle back out the side of the Jeep. Okay, as you get your fuel tank up into place, you want to make sure you connect all your vent hoses and your electrical and your fuel lines. And then you want to be mindful of all 7 of your bolts when you're putting the gas tank up. Make sure you get them in the right holes. Now that we've got our fuel tank in place, we're going to go ahead and put the screws back into hold the filler neck in place, and we're going to put the fuse back in the fuse box, and then we're going to start the vehicle up. One, 2, 3. Now that we've got our fuse in, we're going to go ahead and turn this on to the on position 3 times because we need to prime that fuel pump before we start it. Now it's time for my favorite part. I'm going to go ahead and take this thing for a test drive. Why don't you go ahead and subscribe so you can follow along at our next project in the garage. We'll be doing the high steer knuckles on my JK.
So let's talk about the fuel pump you replaced. I want to ask you what are going to be common symptoms that people are going to experience, and then also let's talk about what we would do to diagnose that. So what kind of common symptoms would people say if they have a fuel pump that's either starting to fail or has failed?
Okay, I would say that the most common symptom would be a crank with no start. So you obviously go to start your Jeep and it doesn't want to start.
But your engine still turns over?
Yes.
Okay. What's some other things?
Well, in our case, when the fuel pump got warm, like the vehicle was driving on the highway for about an hour, and the fuel pump would get warm and then it wouldn't function and the vehicle would shut off and then it wouldn't want to start.
Okay.
So that's one thing. Or say you're going at high speeds or trying to go uphill, or you're towing something and the vehicle's not gaining speed, or it's starting to sputter. Those are other symptoms too.
Okay. Okay, so you just talked to us about some symptoms. Let's talk about diagnostics. So in the case where you have the crank no start, so you turn your key, the engine turns over, but your vehicle's not starting, how are we going to determine that that's actually the fuel pump is to be in our problem there?
Okay, well, there's a couple of things that you can do. First, what you want to do is turn your key to the on position, and you should be able to hear your fuel pump kick on. It'll be like a click. You'll hear it maybe run a little bit for like 2 or 3 seconds. If you don't hear that, then it's likely your fuel pump. So what you could do is take some starter fluid and spray it in the air intake of your engine and crank it over. And if it starts, runs for like 2, maybe 3 seconds and shuts off, then you know you're having a fuel issue.
Okay. In the case we talked about that maybe you drive on the highway for a little while and the vehicle sputters out, doesn't want to restart, probably because that fuel pump is getting overheated, or you have a loss of power under load. How are we going to test that fuel pump in that case?
Okay, in order to test it, you might have to take it to a shop to test your fuel pressure. You'll have to take it, go to O'Reilly's or AutoZone or whatever, and there's a tool that you can actually rent that will test your fuel pressure. In our case, we went to O'Reilly's and borrowed a tool, and the Jeep Wrangler fuel pressure is supposed to run around 50 psi, and when we tested it, we were running at 35.
Okay. Anything else about the fuel pumps you want to share? Is that it?
No, that's it. But you can like and subscribe to our channel and watch our next video. Thanks.
See you guys.